Boy, is this hat starting to look like a great investment. Welcome to This Week in Racing, one day early because yesterday there was absolutely such a huge avalanche of amazing news that I felt like it would be kind of counterintuitive to wait till Friday to talk about all of it. We've got Tony Stewart returning to NASCAR. We've got NASCAR running on the Daytona road course. IndyCar fans in Australia will actually be able to watch the races again. And oh, by the way, Jimmie Johnson has confirmed that he will be driving an IndyCar this year. It's a big week. We got a lot to talk about. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get to it. This Week in Racing. So great news for Australian and New Zealand-based IndyCar fans. They will be able to watch live races once again legally through Fox Sports, which has picked up the broadcasting rights to the series. And you got to think that part of this is Roger Penske getting some stuff done, especially when he's hired the V8 Supercar champion, or the Supercar champion, Scott McLaughlin, to come over and run some races in the IndyCar Series this year and potentially go full-time next year. And it's also great for the Australian fans to be able to see Will Power, of course, the Indy 500 winner from just a couple years ago, and Scott Dixon, the third on the all-time win list, get to race in front of their home fans once again, even if they don't have a race in Australia at this particular point. NASCAR created a lot of headlines this week, and one of them really set the boomers off. NASCAR will be going to a single lug wheel for the 2021 season for the next-gen car. It's an 18-inch spec wheel supplied by BBS. And unfortunately, a lot of NASCAR fans were very upset about this because the pit stops are definitely, no doubt about it, going to change. Going from a 5-lug deal where, of course, you've got the kind of classic NASCAR pit stop noise that everybody seems to love. But ultimately, there's not a whole lot of top-level racing that runs single lugs anymore. And I understand the stock car argument everybody talks about constantly, that the cars need to be stock. I've got some news for you. They don't have doors. They don't have working headlights. They don't have... they're made of tubes. I mean, NASCAR cars are about as far from stock as they possibly could be. And I mean, it's been like 50 years. I mean, the technology is way out of date as well. I mean, if you want to talk about stock cars, why are we allowing a V8 Camry to race in NASCAR? It's a bit funny to draw the line, in my opinion, at single lug rims as being the point that NASCAR took the stock out of stock car racing. Just a little bit funny. And the fan outrage continued because NASCAR is also contemplating changing the number placement on the next-gen car. This was leaked from a fan council survey, and there were about 6 different designs that NASCAR was kind of throwing out there. And once again, it was just kind of a big reaction from the NASCAR faithful. I do understand where, the NASCAR fans come from on this one, because yes, drivers have been identified in NASCAR by their numbers more than any other motorsport by a long, long way. I mean, you can't see that number 3 font of Dale Earnhardt or that number 24 font without thinking of Jeff Gordon. So I understand the concern about this, but ultimately it's going to be for the sponsors to decide. And I think if the sponsors want their names big and bold on the side of the cars, that's what they're going to get. And unfortunately, and I hate to put it this way, but the fans are just going to have to deal with it. I guess my question would be, is the number placement really something that affects the racing? Is this really something that you want? Is this really the hill you want to die on? I mean, this is something. I mean, NASCAR fans have put up with so much change in the last few years. Again, it's kind of weird to me that single lug rims and number placement seem to be the big sticking points when other more major changes have come along down the pipeline, and many of us who criticize those changes were told just to sit back and watch it before you judge it, which is just kind of funny. And now things that are kind of inconsequential to the racing are creating some of the biggest social media stinks. Something that doesn't stink is Tony Stewart coming back to NASCAR. It's only on a one-race basis in the Xfinity Series, but it's going to be a really exciting event because Tony Stewart is returning in a Stewart-Haas racing car in the Xfinity Series at the Indianapolis road course. Of course, it's the first race on the road course for the stock cars, or maybe the not-so-stock cars, of the Xfinity Series. And Tony Stewart, being a local Hoosier, born and bred, obviously came up through the ranks, through the sprints and midgets, and then eventually making it to the IndyCar Series, where he then transitioned to NASCAR, winning a couple of Brickyard 400s. This is fantastic news. I think it's really exciting for everybody involved for Tony Stewart to be back in some capacity. I think he's going to sell a lot of tickets. I think a lot of people are going to be tuning into this, even if they, it's going to be a big event one way or the other, and I think you're going to get a lot of all-star drivers in this race, and I think Tony Stewart is really just kind of the first big announcement. I think there are several more on the way. And finally, a little bit of IndyCar testing news, and believe it or not, Carlin Racing may well be the shocking upset of the year, because in the last 2 days prior to all the teams leaving Sebring, where they are testing, to St. Petersburg, Florida for the first race of the season, Carlin Racing topped both of the most recent test days. Felipe Nasr was fastest on day 1 for Carlin Racing in car number 31, and on day number 2 it was Max Chilton fastest. So the two Carlin Racing drivers have gone fastest in testing. Now again, it wasn't a full field test, and it's possible that many of the other teams were not looking to test outright speed. There's a million different things they could have possibly been testing. But it's going to be something to look at going into St. Petersburg. Is the pace of the Carlin Racing team for real? Are they suddenly championship contenders? And now we get to one of the absolutely enormous stories that broke yesterday. NASCAR is changing their schedule. We knew this for a while, but the big change that was announced yesterday is that they are changing Speedweeks significantly. Adam Stern, our pal from the Sports Business Journal, says that this is a part of a much larger schedule change going into 2021 that is meant to shorten the schedule. It means that Daytona, the teams will only be there for 1 calendar week rather than 2 as they have been in the most recent past. Speedweeks, at least in terms of NASCAR racing specifically, is only going to be 1 week. On Tuesday, the first day of on-track activity, at least for a major part of the event, will be the Clash. Now the big difference with the Clash is that it's going to be run on the road course, and we'll talk about that later in just a second. Wednesday will be the qualifying day, pole qualifying, when they set the front row for the Daytona 500. Thursday will be the duel, so there's only a day gap between qualifying and the duels. Definitely like that. Friday, traditional, it's the Truck Series race, no difference there. Saturday will be a double header with the Xfinity Series and ARCA, and then of course the traditional Daytona 500. So first, I'll talk about this everything but the Clash, because the Clash is going to be its own thing. I think it's exciting to see qualifying and the duels back to back. I think that Xfinity and ARCA, that's going to be very interesting. I want to see how the schedule plays out. I personally, and I know this is probably not going to be how it ends up being scheduled, I hope that the Xfinity Series continues to have its daytime afternoon race and ARCA continues to be a night race. I'm guessing they're going to switch it around to try to get a better TV number for Xfinity by running it later, but you never know. But at the same time, I think that ARCA, the day before the Daytona 500, is only going to make that race and ARCA Night in America even more crazy than it usually is. And I'm kind of excited to see ARCA get that platform, that stage, and probably a big crowd, probably a decent TV rating. I think for the ARCA series in particular, they really were the big winners here. The question, I think, on everybody's mind is what's going on with the Clash? What's the deal? And I will say this. If you watch this channel, you're ahead of the curve. You would have known from the last 2 years of the Clash, whether you like it or not. Here's the deal. The Clash as it was did not work. It had become a test session for the Daytona 500. And that was only going to get worse next year with the brand new next-gen car. So I said in the most recent video they have to change this format. It has to be done. They have no choice, because otherwise you're going to have 3 years of an embarrassing race. And yes, it's an exhibition race, and that's part of the reason why it doesn't matter that it's on the road course so much. But it is your first race of the season. It's nationally broadcast. It's not like the All-Star race, which kind of takes place in the middle of the season, right in the middle of the month of May at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and then, of course, Monaco for the Grand Prix. You kind of miss, or not as many people are kind of paying attention and scrutinizing the All-Star race as they are the Clash. The Clash is really the first race of the season for many casual racing fans. So every time you lay an egg, especially this year where every single car crashes, and add on to that, you're running the single file formation for 90% of the race. It just wasn't going to be, that was not something, I don't think anybody in the right mind would look at that and say it's a good product. And it encourages me quite a bit that the NASCAR brass are seeing the same thing that I am. It encourages me that they're going to make the changes that are, in my opinion, necessary for the plate racing going forward, because I think looking at how they've handled the Clash, going to a road course is going to change a few it's not going to, I don't think it's going to totally eliminate the Clash from being a test session. Don't get me wrong. It's really going to depend on the format, depending on how often they call yellows and whatnot to try to bunch the field up. Maybe they invert the field a couple different ways. It's going to be weird to see it's going to be important to see how they format this thing before we can really say it's a success or it's not, or it has the potential to be a success or not. But I am, again, encouraged, because changing this race to a road course race, I think encourages, first of all, I think it encourages a better race. Sure, it may get a little more spread out because it's a road course race, but here's the big key, is that this is going to be the first time outside of testing in a true race situation that you're going to see these next-gen cars all on the track at the same time. So I think you're going to see the drivers a little more willing to race them than they otherwise would be, on the oval. Because on the oval, they're trying to set fuel numbers, they're trying to experiment with pit strategy and all that stuff for the 500. Of course, that's the biggest race of the year for NASCAR. So from that perspective, I'm encouraged. Now, one thing I did suggest, and I don't think this is going to happen, but I would love to see them not run the backstretch chicane, the bus stop. I'd love to see them just plow right through that and kind of give us a semi-unrestricted lap of Daytona. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm guessing they're going to run the bus stop. And if you look at the NASCAR road racing product, especially the Roval, I think the success that the Roval had on NASCAR or for NASCAR, I think has shaped a lot of what NASCAR is going to do going forward, whether you like that or not. I think they looked at that event and started to look for opportunities, like we're seeing at Indianapolis with the Xfinity race on the road course, and now we're seeing the Clash on the road course. You're probably going to see more road racing. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's up for you to decide. I know some people, and I think Dale Jr. is going to be one of the people on his podcast is probably going to say this if he hasn't already, that he does not like this change. I'm guessing he's going to say something along the lines of, hey, I like that it was an oval race. Now, Dale Jr. wanted it to be, a 20-lap shootout, and I totally agree with him on that. I think a 20-lap oval race probably would be a better product than what they're going to end up getting on the road courses. The problem is television. Fox is going to want a 2-hour-long thing to sell ads on. A 20-lap race is only going to last about 30 minutes. So I understand that. I think, in a perfect world, it's like it was in the 80s and 90s, and you do a 20-lap race and throw a yellow in the middle and invert the field. But unfortunately, we live in a modern world where television dictates so much of this. So given those restrictions, I think NASCAR has made a good choice here, and I'm excited to see what next year's Clash looks like with these format changes. Oh, and you thought that big news was done? They ain't got nothing. Daytona ain't got nothing on this. Jimmie Johnson has confirmed that he will drive an IndyCar not only this year, but within the month. Wednesday, he was at the McLaren SP, Aero McLaren SP race shop in Indianapolis doing a seat fit, and he will be testing the Aero McLaren SP car in April at the Barber Motorsports Park in Alabama. Now, Adam Stern has reported that McLaren has bought the number 48, or at least acquired the rights to the number 48 from Dreyer Reinbold Racing, which ran that number with J.R. Hildebrand last year. So why would you acquire a number for a test that you do not intend to run another race with? That is something that I think is a big red flag, or maybe a green flag in this case, that this is not just intended to be a test. And just for fun, you may be seeing up on the screen right now kind of a mock-up that I put together, if you haven't already seen it, of an Ally Bank sponsored IndyCar with a number 48 on it. So just we'll just throw that out there and see if it ends up sticking. But this is a huge deal for IndyCar. And I talked about the Kyle Busch. Well, Kurt Busch obviously was kind of the forerunner to a lot of this stuff that we've seen happening with drivers crossing over and trying IndyCar. But I talked about this in the Kyle Busch thing. From an international perspective, there's no doubt that a driver like Fernando Alonso or a driver like Scott McLaughlin is a huge get and necessary to have in your series. But from an American perspective, there's nothing bigger than a Cup star, a NASCAR Cup star, coming over and giving IndyCar racing a shot. And when you look at Jimmie Johnson, and some people are going to disagree with me on this, but he definitely, a lot of people don't give him the credit that he needs to have. And I think a lot of it has to do with the way he won his championships with the chase format. That being said, the guy is a 7-time champion, and there's only 2 other drivers that have done that, Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt. Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt never raced IndyCars. In fact, Richard Petty was so scared when they stuck him in an IndyCar one time that they were going to fire the engine that he jumped out of it. But Jimmie Johnson, taking this seriously, doing a test with Arrow McLaren SP, Barber, and again, it's at Barber Motorsports Park, one of the most physically demanding racetracks on the calendar, and a great place to test. It's where Fernando Alonso did his road course racing test with Andretti Autosport just a couple of years ago. And I mean, this is very serious stuff. If it wasn't serious that he was getting a seat made, and if you didn't believe some of the things that he'd said the last couple of years, that, yeah, I'd probably run a road course race in IndyCar when I get done with Cup racing, and then you start seeing him at Circuit of the Americas with Arrow McLaren SP, and he's like, yeah, I'm just a fan. I'm just here to check out the... It's like, come on, man. We know what you're doing there, and it's nice to have this confirmed. So here's where we get into the weeds. When do we see Jimmie Johnson in an IndyCar race? Now, we know a couple of roadblocks. Jenna Fryer reported, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, that Jimmie Johnson had actually softened his feelings on ovals a little bit, probably almost certainly due in part to the aeroscreen. In fact, Fernando Alonso confirmed that information. He specifically said, Jimmie's got the green light to do IndyCar racing. That was full stop. Jenna Fryer had reported that Jimmie was interested in road course racing and possibly a short oval. Now that's changed from the last couple of years where he said no ovals, period, for IndyCar racing. So again, maybe get hyped a little bit that maybe we see Jimmie on an oval in IndyCar. This year, is there any possibility? I looked at the 2 schedules between NASCAR and IndyCar, and it doesn't look like there are any off weekends for NASCAR where IndyCar is also racing. That's a little bit disappointing from a scheduling perspective. Obviously, I don't think either of the series probably had a ton of control over that, but at the same time, there really isn't an easy way for Jimmie Johnson to run an IndyCar race this year. He would have to do a Fernando Alonso where he would drop out of a race on the Cup side and come over and do a full weekend at IndyCar. I just don't see that happening. Now, that being said, you could theoretically, if Jimmie wins a race before, let's say he wins the next race at Phoenix, if he wins that race, he's in the playoffs. He can race for his 8th championship. Maybe Rick Hendrick will be a little more forgiving, especially because it's Jimmie's last season, in letting one of his prized drivers go over and run a weekend in IndyCar. Maybe he goes and runs the IndyCar GP. You never know. There was another race that I think maybe Iowa, there was a possibility with the way the night races kind of ended up going, kind of scheduling out between IndyCar and NASCAR. The problem with that, of course, is that he'd have to have either somebody qualify his IndyCar for him or qualify his stock car for him to run 2 races. Of course, then you can say, well, maybe he could do the double for the Indy 500. As much as I would love Jimmie Johnson to do the Indianapolis 500, I just don't think he's going to do it. Now, I mean, like I said maybe a couple of days ago, and especially because Alonso said that thing that was like full blanket, full stop, hey, you know, Jimmy's got the green light to do IndyCar. I would love for him to do it. Maybe he catches the bug. I don't think he will. Now, that being said, I did hear a rumor, and I'm going to say this because the source that told me this also told me that Alex Palou was going to replace Sebastian Bourdais at Coyne about 7 months before it happened. So I heard that maybe Jimmie Johnson and Fernando Alonso are going to start a team next year. Again, just a rumor, but there's a possibility there. Here is the really good thing about Jimmie Johnson doing IndyCar racing. And this is where it's positive for the IndyCar series. Jimmie is not doing the Indianapolis 500. And you know what race doesn't need as much help as the rest of the other races in terms of TV rating and general interest? The Indianapolis 500. Now, if Jimmie runs an oval race in Iowa, or he goes to Barber, or he goes to Long Beach, his home race, essentially in IndyCar, or he goes to Laguna Seca, that is going to do a significant amount of good for the series in terms of exposure, in terms of articles, in terms of stupid people on YouTube making videos about it, all that stuff. It's going to do gangbusters. Now, certainly I think, you know, if he ran the Indy 500, it would definitely have a huge impact in terms of television ratings, interest. But it's still going to do, I'm sure, the first race Jimmie Johnson runs, you're going to have a ton of NASCAR fans. You're going to have a ton of casual sports fans tuning into that to see what's going to happen, to see how he will perform. And if you're worried about performance, I wouldn't be. Remember when he did that seat swap with Fernando Alonso? And again, it's a seat swap. It's not a totally serious thing. But Jimmie was faster than Fernando in a Formula One car. Just as saying, this is not, I think this is much more a Scott McLaughlin style thing where they're going to put him in a car. I'm making a big assumption here, maybe not so much of a big assumption. He's going to be pretty quick when they get him in an Indy car at Barber. And they're probably going to say, all right, what are we going to do next? And I'm sure if Zach Brown is buying a number, especially 48, this isn't a fling. This isn't a one-time thing. There is something serious in the works behind the scenes at the Orange team, and it's going to be kind of fun to see where it all ends up panning out. I mean, this is fun. I mean, I said this on Twitter. IndyCar 2021 is looking like it's going to be freaking IROC. You got Fernando Alonso, you got Jimmie Johnson, you got Scott McLaughlin, and then you're going to add him in with Colton Herta and Alexander Rossi and Scott Dixon, Joseph Newgarden, Will Power, Simon Pagenaud. The list goes on and on there. Felipe Nasr, you know, talking about testing, maybe that's another all-star from around the world that's going to be kind of participate. I mean, it's going to be fun, and I'm happy to be a guy on YouTube who gets to talk about this sort of stuff because it's just so much fun. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Got a big week coming up next week because I'm getting on a plane, getting my happy butt to St. Petersburg, and as well the next week, Sebring. So stay tuned. Ton of coverage coming from those 2 events, and I can't wait to see you there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.